The story of Joseph begins long before the betrayal, long before the pit, and long before Egypt. It begins in the heart of a father who had already learned many times over that God leads by strange paths. Jacob was a man of experience. He knew what fear was when he fled from his brother. He knew what it meant to wrestle with God in the night. He knew what it meant to wait for years for a promise to be fulfilled. And that is why the birth of Joseph was not merely a joy for him, it was confirmation that God does not forget. Rachel had been barren for a long time. In the culture of that time, this meant not only pain, but shame. She watched other women give birth, watched other children grow, while her prayers seemed to hang unanswered in silence. And when Joseph was born, it was a victory not only of the body, but of faith. That is why Jacob looked at this boy and saw more than just a son. He saw a miracle that came after long waiting. Joseph grew up among his brothers, but he was never one of them. This was not his fault, it was reality. His father's love set him apart every day. Jacob spoke with him more, listened to him more carefully, looked at him more gently. And then there was the robe, colorful, long, visible from afar. A garment that spoke without words. This son is special. For Joseph, it was a sign of love. For his brothers, a sign of injustice. They could not say it out loud. At first, they were simply silent. Then they began to joke, then to avoid him. And eventually, a thought settled in their hearts. A thought they themselves feared. If he disappeared, everything would become easier. Joseph did not see this. He believed that truth was always good. When he saw his brothers doing wrong, he spoke of it to his father, not understanding that to them, this felt like betrayal. He did not want to be better, but that was how they saw him. And it was at that very time that God began to speak to Joseph through dreams. The first dream was simple: a field, work, sheaves. But the moment when his sheaf rose and the others bowed filled him with unease. The second dream was even stronger. The heavenly lights, the sun, the moon, the stars, bowed before him. This was no longer only about his brothers. It was about something far greater. Joseph woke with the feeling that he had touched a mystery. He did not understand it, but he knew it was not accidental. And he did what pure hearts often do. He shared it. His brothers heard not the future, they heard a threat. Jacob heard more and fell silent. When the brothers went far away to pasture the flock, Jacob grew anxious. The roads were dangerous, the land was unsettled. He called Joseph and asked him to go see whether they were well. This was not punishment, it was an act of trust. Joseph went willingly. He always wanted to be useful, wanted to earn his brother's respect, even if he did not know how. The journey was long. The sun burned, dust clung to his feet. When Joseph finally saw his brothers in the distance, he felt relief. He did not know that in that very moment, their decision was finally sealed. "Here comes that dreamer," someone said. There was no humor in those words. They sounded cold, like a sentence. Joseph drew nearer, and everything happened too fast. They seized him with sudden fury. Hands that once shared bread with him now held him tight and harshly. He did not even have time to understand why. He only saw their faces, no longer the ones he remembered. They stripped him of his colorful robe, the very one that had been a symbol of love that morning. Now it lay in the dust, torn and despised. This was the first blow, humiliation. The second came immediately. They dragged him to the pit. The pit was deep and dark. Above him remained only a narrow circle of light and the faces of his brothers looking down. Joseph screamed. He called them by name. He asked, "Why?" But the answer was silence. There in the pit, something irreversible happened to Joseph. For the first time, he understood that those closest to you may not save you. The most terrifying thing was not the fall. The most terrifying thing was that the brothers sat down to eat. They ate bread, talked among themselves, while below, in the darkness, their brother begged for his life. This was the moment when envy finally turned into cruelty. Reuben, the eldest, stepped away for a time, hoping later to pull Joseph out and secretly return him to their father. But when he returned, it was too late. A caravan of merchants, Ishmaelites, was passing by on the way to Egypt. "Why should we destroy him?" Judah said. "Let us sell him." It sounded like a compromise, not destruction, just a sale, just removing the problem. They pulled Joseph out of the pit. For a moment, hope flared within him, but it was immediately crushed. He was handed over to strangers. He heard the clinking of silver, 20 pieces of silver, the price at which his life was valued, the price of a brother. He watched his brothers walk away. None of them looked him in the eyes. The caravan moved on. Every step carried Joseph farther from home, from his father, from everything familiar. He walked in silence. The tears had stopped. He did not know where he was going. He knew only one thing: there was no way back. Meanwhile, the brothers returned home. They took the colorful robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the fabric in blood. Then they brought it to Jacob. "We found this," they said. "See whether it is your son's robe." Jacob recognized it at once, and something in him broke. He did not cry out immediately. He stared silently at the stained cloth, as if trying to convince himself it was a mistake. But then the pain burst forth. He tore his clothes. He wept for many days. He refused all comfort, and the brothers stood nearby. They saw the pain, they heard the weeping, and they remained silent. Their sin began to live with them, and Joseph walked south to a land he had not chosen. He did not yet know that there, in slavery, the man would begin to be formed who would one day save them all. The caravan traveled for several days. For Joseph, the road felt like a dream without waking. He walked without counting steps, hearing unfamiliar languages, watching the land grow ever more foreign. His past lay behind him. His future had no shape. He had no name, no rights, no choice. When they entered Egypt, Joseph saw for the first time a city unlike anything he had known. No flocks, no nomadic tents. There were walls, columns, canals, stone, power, and order. A world that did not pause for one person. A world of systems. At the slave market, Joseph stood among others. He was examined and evaluated. He was bought by Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard, a man of power, discipline, and strength. The first days in Potiphar's house were hard. Joseph did not know the language, the rules, or the customs. But he knew one thing: how to work. He did not allow bitterness to destroy him. He worked quietly, attentively, faithfully. He listened, he observed, he learned. And what happens again and again in Scripture happened here as well. God was with him. This did not mean ease. It meant that even in slavery, his work began to bear fruit. Order appeared in Potiphar's house. Things prospered. The servants began to trust this Hebrew youth. Potiphar noticed. He did not know Joseph's God, but he saw the results. In time, he entrusted the entire household to him. Joseph received responsibility, but not freedom. He learned to lead without owning himself. It was a quiet school of leadership. But then came a new test, more subtle than chains. Potiphar's wife noticed Joseph. He was young, strong, intelligent. He did not grovel. He was not broken. In her eyes, he became desirable. At first, there were looks, then words, then direct invitations. Joseph was trapped. He was a slave. She was the mistress of the house. He could not complain. He could not leave. But he could say, no. And he did, again and again. He did not speak of fear of Potiphar. He spoke of God. How can I do this great evil and sin against God? Those words were decisive. They revealed how he saw himself, not as a slave, not as a victim, but as a man who lived before God. One day, when no one else was in the house, she seized him by his garment. In that moment, everything could have gone differently. But Joseph did the only thing he could. He fled. He left the garment in her hands and ran. He kept his integrity and lost his reputation. Offended and humiliated, she accused him. She said the slave had tried to disgrace her. Potiphar believed her. Perhaps he doubted, but the system allowed no other outcome. Joseph was thrown into prison. The prison was deeper than the pit, because this time it was not sudden betrayal, but the cost of faithfulness. Joseph could have avoided it, but he chose God. In prison, he began again from nothing. Stone, cold, chains. But even there, he did not let his heart break. He served. He helped. He paid attention to others. And again, God was with him. The prison warden entrusted him with oversight of the other prisoners. Joseph once again became an administrator without hope of release. Days dragged on. Years passed. It was there that he met two men who would become the key to his future: the Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. They were distressed because they had dreams they could not understand. Joseph noticed their sadness and asked why. When they told him their dreams, he said, "Interpretations belong to God," and he interpreted them accurately, without fear, without embellishment. A few days later, everything happened exactly as he said. The cupbearer was restored, the baker was removed. Joseph asked only one thing: "Remember me." But he was forgotten. 2 years of silence, 2 years when God seemed silent. And it was this silence that prepared the next chapter. Days passed that looked exactly alike. For Joseph, time in prison was no longer counted in events. It was counted in breaths. Morning replaced night. Night replaced morning. Hope no longer hurt because he had learned not to cling to it. And it was precisely then, when a person lets go of escape, that God begins to act. One night, Pharaoh dreamed dreams unlike ordinary visions. They were clear, repeated, heavy. In the first dream, Pharaoh stood by the Nile and saw 7 healthy, fat cows rise from the water. They grazed peacefully until 7 thin, gaunt cows appeared and devoured them, yet remained just as thin. The sight was disturbing. Then came a second dream. On one stalk grew 7 full, healthy ears of grain. After them came 7 thin ears, scorched by the east wind, and again the weak consumed the strong. Pharaoh awoke in fear. He knew this was not random. He summoned priests, sages, interpreters, but none could give an answer. Their words were either empty or conflicting. Then the cupbearer remembered. It was not sudden insight, it was a quiet realization of guilt. "I remember my fault today," he said. "There is a Hebrew youth in prison. He interpreted my dream, and it came true." Pharaoh ordered Joseph to be brought immediately, a moment that had waited 13 years. Joseph was brought out of prison and given new clothes. When he stood before Pharaoh, Pharaoh said, "I have heard that you can interpret dreams." Joseph did not seize the chance to glorify himself. He answered simply, "It is not I. God will give the answer." Pharaoh told the dreams. Joseph listened carefully. He did not rush. He saw not only images, but the structure of time. He explained that the dreams were one and the same. 7 years of great abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine that would erase the memory of plenty. But Joseph did not stop at interpretation. He did what no one expected. He offered a plan. He said a wise man should be appointed to collect 1/5 of the harvest during the years of abundance, to preserve life during the famine. Silence filled the hall. This was no longer the speech of a prisoner. It was the voice of a leader. Pharaoh said to his advisors, "Can we find anyone like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" And he placed Joseph second only to himself. He gave him a ring, garments, a chariot. People bowed before him. His name was proclaimed. But Joseph remembered, power is not a reward, it is a responsibility. The years of abundance began. Joseph traveled the land, organized storage, built storehouses, taught discipline. He worked with the same diligence as in slavery, only now on a greater scale. During those years, sons were born to him. He named the first Manasseh, God has made me forget. The second, Ephraim, God has made me fruitful. The names were prayers. They meant the pain had not vanished, but it no longer ruled. When the years of famine came, they did not creep in, they struck. The land dried up. People were afraid, and Egypt opened its storehouses. Nations came, including those Joseph had not seen for many years. When his brothers entered and bowed before him, the prophecy was fulfilled, literally. But there was no triumph in Joseph's heart. There was trembling. For now it was not time to manage grain. It was time to manage his own heart. He recognized them at once. They did not recognize him. Before him stood the same men who had sold him. Now he held power over their lives. And here began the final and most delicate test. When the brothers came a second time to Egypt, Joseph's heart was torn in two. Outwardly, he remained a ruler, calm, restrained, authoritative. Inwardly, two voices struggled within him: the pain of the boy who had been sold and the wisdom of the man God had formed. He tested his brothers, not out of cruelty, but to see whether they had become different. He spoke harshly, accused them of spying, demanded they bring their youngest brother Benjamin. Fear returned to them. They remembered their guilt and said to one another, "This is because of what we did to our brother." When they returned with Benjamin, Joseph saw the face of his full brother, the son of the same mother. He barely held back tears. But the test was not yet complete. He ordered his silver cup placed in Benjamin's sack and accused him of theft. It was a trap, not for punishment, but for truth. When the cup was found, the brothers could have done what they once did to Joseph: leave the younger one behind and save themselves. But this time, everything was different. Judah stepped forward and said words that shattered the final barrier. "Take me instead of him, for how can I return to my father without the boy?" In that moment, Joseph knew God had finished his work. The brothers were no longer the same men. He could not endure it any longer. He ordered all the Egyptians to leave, and when only the brothers remained, he wept so loudly that it was heard beyond the walls. "I am Joseph," he said. "Is my father still alive?" They stood frozen. Fear, shame, astonishment, all met in a single moment. But Joseph drew near and spoke words that transcend human logic. "Do not be afraid or distressed that you sold me here. God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." This was not merely forgiveness. It was a complete rereading of the past. When the news reached Jacob, his heart did not believe at once. He had wept too long. But when he saw the chariots, the wealth, the signs of authority, his spirit revived. God appeared to him at night and told him not to fear going down to Egypt. The meeting of Jacob and Joseph was quiet and deep. They embraced for a long time. There were few words. "Now I am ready to depart," Jacob said, "since I have seen you alive." The family settled in the land of Goshen. They lived within Egypt, but did not become Egypt. Joseph provided for them, but did not make them dependent. He remembered, this was refuge, not promise. When Jacob felt his end approaching, he called his sons. He blessed them not blindly, he spoke truth. He foretold the future of each tribe. Then he blessed Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, crossing his hands. Again, it was a reminder, God does not choose by human order. After Jacob's passing, Joseph kept his promise and buried his father in the land of his ancestors. After the burial, the brothers were afraid. They thought Joseph might now take revenge. But he wept again and said, "Am I in the place of God? You intended evil against me, but God meant it for good, to preserve the lives of many." This was the second forgiveness, deeper, calmer. Joseph began his journey as a beloved son. He passed through the pit, slavery, and prison. He became a ruler, yet remained a servant. He was betrayed and became a savior. And above all, God never wastes pain. he transforms it into life.